In this video, we're going to take a quick look at the difference between SQL or raw SQL in Python and using an ORM or object relational mapper in Python instead of using raw SQL. So the first thing that you need to do, step one, is to install an ORM package because you're going to reference it. Now, what I've done is I've got a package called SQL Alchemy, which is an ORM tool, and it's literally I just pip install it and it's ready to go. The second thing that I want to do is compare these side by side so you can see the difference. On the right hand side is our raw SQL code that we've just done. On the left hand side is the same thing but with the ORM instead of raw SQL. So you can see immediately we import the whole library of SQL, but here we're importing SQL Alchemy and importing certain things that we need out of the library of code. The second step of connecting to the database is very similar. We connect just using different syntax. And part of the SQL Alchemy way of setting up a session is using these two lines of code. The next thing that is different to our raw SQL code is over here we basically created a cursor object so we could start executing SQL commands. But what we do instead here with ORMs is we create, I guess, a class that mirrors our table. So we're using object-oriented programming, I guess, to map our table. And so here you can see here, well, I'm creating a class called elective enrollment. And inside this class, there's a couple of things. I've got a name for this, for the table that exists. It's called elective enrollment, same as my actual SQL. And I want four fields, or four attributes in this case. And these mirror the fields in my table. And you can see here there's an inheriting this base class, which gives us all our functionality to create it's inheriting all the functionality that we need to do things like add, delete, insert, update, and all that kind of stuff that we need to do with this particular class database table. Then this next step is just mirroring this if not exists. So it will just create a new table in SQL using this format that we've just said. So it's going to be like a translator between this object that we've created, or this class, and what's in SQL. Okay, but it will still look like a proper table in SQL. And for this ORM, we need to, I guess, manage a session between our Python code and our table, and I guess this ORM is sitting in the middle as a middleman, if you like, and we need to set up that session so that it can talk between the two. The next part looks very similar, where we created a function where you can add electives, and you can see here these lines are identical. But what's different is the way we insert data into our database. So here we used raw SQL to insert the data into our table. But what we do here is slightly different with our ORM. So basically what we do is we create a new object out of our class, and we essentially give it some attributes. So we're saying at the time of our object being born, we're going to give it 3 attributes. The first attribute we're going to give it is a student name. And we're actually directly referencing off our attributes from the class. So we're saying, well, the student name from this class is equal to what the person's just typed in. This elective one, this attribute that I've got in my object, is equal to what the person's typed in elective one, and so forth. And we're just simply saving that object and all its things inside it into a new object called new enrollment. And then when we're ready, we can then add this new enrollment to our table. Now again, this ORM sits in the middle. It passes on this new enrollment and loads it, injects it into the SQL database. And there we go, electives added successfully. Now to query data from a database, we used raw SQL again in our previous example, but here we're using the ORM and using some of the syntax in the ORM to query. So you can see here we've set up a session with our ORM and our table so that they're talking. So we reference that session, and then using our dot notation, we then look up the documentation, and we realize there's a query function or method, and you can pass in our object, or our class, sorry, and we're basically saying, hey, I want to query all of it, and save it into a thing called enrollments. And then we can loop over our enrollments, which is basically a big fat table of data now. And we can then pull info out of that. So for example, here we have our object called enrollment, and inside that object, like up here, we've got an attribute that we can pull, .enrollment.id. And here we've got enrollment.studentName. So these are just, again, this is just an object that we are manipulating and seeing its attributes and methods. And so really, that is the difference between an ORM and using raw SQL. The ORM is supposed to speed up development time once you get familiar with the syntax. And it behaves in the same way as you would program with an OOP perspective. So it works really well hand in hand with OOP.